When Karen from the HOA dialed 911 over my wooden cross, I knew things were about to get ugly. I never imagined that a simple cross could spark a full-blown neighborhood war. There I stood on my porch, gripping a crumpled letter, heart pounding as I locked eyes with her. Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of what was acceptable. To her, even my faith was a violation. It started with whispers, subtle but sharp, slicing through the quiet streets like knives. Neighbors who once waved now watched. States that lingered a second too long. I caught one of them, an old man who used to chat with me about football, staring at my porch, shaking his head before walking away. Then came the letter. The first strike. Dear homeowner, your recent decoration does not align with the uniform aesthetic of our community. Please remove it within 48 hours to avoid penalties. I let out a bitter chuckle. Decoration? Is that what they thought this was? A meaningless trinket? A piece of seasonal decor like a cheap plastic wreath? This was my faith, my belief, my right. I folded the letter and shoved it into my pocket. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a response. But they weren't done. The next morning, I opened my door and nearly stepped on another letter. No envelope this time. Just a single bold message printed in capital letters. Remove it or else. I exhaled slowly. Or else what? I looked up, and there she was. Standing across the street, clutching a stack of mail like a scepter, her piercing gaze locked onto me. She didn't flinch. She didn't pretend to look away. She wanted me to see her. A slow, burning fire ignited in my chest. This wasn't about HOA rules. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control, about power. She wanted to break me. I curled my fingers around the note, held it up in plain sight, then ripped it in half. Karen's jaw tightened. I saw her grip on the mail shift, her knuckles turning white. Without a word, she spun on her heel and stormed back inside. I stood there for a long moment, the ripped pieces of paper fluttering to the ground at my feet. The neighborhood was still, but I could feel it. Something had shifted. This wasn't over. I stepped back inside, my hand brushing against the cross as I shut the door. A symbol of my faith. A symbol of defiance. I gripped the worn cross, a silent testament to my faith, and knew it was more than decoration. It was my defiance. She could send letters, she could glare, she could even call the HOA, but if she thought I was going to back down, she had no idea who she was dealing with. Because I wasn't just standing my ground, I was ready for war. By the next morning, the air felt different. Heavier. Charged. It wasn't just Karen anymore. The entire neighborhood was watching. I felt it the moment I stepped outside. A curtain snapped shut across the street. A couple of neighbors who usually walk their dogs in the morning suddenly changed their route, avoiding my house altogether. It was as if I had been marked, an outsider in my own neighborhood. Fine. Let them stare. I grabbed my coffee and sat on my porch, pretending I didn't notice the way conversations hushed whenever I stepped outside. But I noticed everything. The sideways glances. The forced smiles. The way even the kids, who usually rode their bikes up and down the street, seemed to steer clear of my driveway. And then the whispers started. At first they were quiet, passing like a breeze between fences and over neatly trimmed hedges. But by the afternoon, I heard them loud and clear. I heard he refused to take it down. Well, the HOA has rules for a reason. Honestly, I don't know why he's making such a big deal. It's just a decoration. I gritted my teeth and took another sip of coffee, staring straight ahead. They didn't get it. But Karen? Karen understood exactly what she was doing. That afternoon, a black SUV rolled up in front of my house. The HOA. Two men in polo shirts stepped out, clipboards in hand, their expressions unreadable. I already knew what this was about. I met them at the porch before they could knock. I leaned against my weathered railing as Frank approached, clipboard trembling in the harsh light. "Good afternoon. What's the issue?" Frank's eyes darted as he cleared his throat. "We've had several complaints about an unauthorized display." I shifted my gaze to the battered cross behind me. "You're talking about this cross, aren't you?" A flicker of uncertainty passed over his face before he recited, "The HOA mandates a uniform aesthetic." I let out a soft chuckle. Uniform aesthetic? In a neighborhood that thrives on its eccentricities, individuality is our greatest strength. His expression didn't change. "The HOA has guidelines about exterior decorations. All residents are expected to maintain a uniform aesthetic." I almost laughed. A uniform aesthetic. In a neighborhood where half the houses had garden gnomes, flamingo statues, and political yard signs? I shook my head. "I'm not taking it down." The other guy, younger, shifted uncomfortably. He knew this was ridiculous. He knew exactly what this was really about. But Frank? Frank was one of Karen's foot soldiers, and he wasn't here to negotiate. "You have 24 hours to comply," he said, slipping a notice into my hand. "Or further action will be taken." I looked past him, straight across the street. Karen was standing by her window, watching. Smiling. That was when I knew. This wasn't just about my cross. This was personal. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my head. The letters, the whispers, the HOA goons standing on my porch like they owned the place. And Karen, always watching, always waiting. She thought she had me cornered. She thought a few threats and some petty intimidation would make me fold. She was wrong. By morning, I had made my decision. If Karen wanted a fight, she was getting one. I grabbed my toolbox and stepped onto the porch. The air was thick and humid, the sky hanging low with storm clouds. A sign, maybe. But I wasn't backing down. My hands tightened around the cross until the wood creaked under the pressure. A silent vow that I would not yield. As I rebuilt it with fresh nails and a renewed coat of stain, each hammer strike echoed like a declaration of independence, resonating through the hushed neighborhood. I took my time reinforcing the cross. Stronger nails, a fresh coat of wood stain. Permanent. By the time I was done, I could feel eyes on me. Curtains shifting, doors cracking open just enough for the cowards inside to peek. But I didn't care. I wasn't hiding. And then, just as I was finishing up, I saw her, Karen. She was standing at the end of her driveway, phone in hand. Her lips curled into a smirk as she lifted the phone to her ear. And that's when I heard it, the sirens. My stomach dropped. Within minutes, a squad car rolled up to my house. A young officer stepped out, adjusting his belt as he scanned the scene. Karen marched up to him like she had personally summoned the law. "There he is, officer," she said, pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. "He's violating HOA rules, ignoring repeated warnings, and creating a disturbance in the neighborhood." A disturbance? Was she serious? The officer sighed, rubbing his forehead. He was already exhausted, probably dealing with actual emergencies before being dragged into Karen's personal war. "Sir," he said, turning to me, "we got a call about a conflict with the homeowners association." I crossed my arms, refusing to move from my spot. A conflict? Because I put up a cross? Karen folded her arms, tilting her head with fake sympathy. "It's not about the cross. It's about following the rules. He's refusing to comply, and it's upsetting the community." I stared at her. "You mean it's upsetting you?" The officer let out another tired sigh. "Look, I'm not here to arrest anyone over a piece of wood, but if there's an HOA dispute, it's best to handle it civilly." Civilly? I let out a sharp laugh. I've been civil. I've been patient. And yet, here we are, with cops at my door over a damn decoration. The officer glanced between us, clearly over it. I'm going to recommend you both take this to the HOA board. Settle it the right way. Karen's smirk faded. This wasn't the victory she wanted. I met her gaze, unflinching. I'll see you at the meeting then. She didn't say a word. She just turned on her heel and stomped back toward her house. But I knew she wasn't done. This was only the beginning. The official HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday. I had 3 days. 3 days of glares from my neighbors. 3 days of feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Karen didn't waste a second. The next morning, an official violation notice was taped to my front door. HOA fines. Threats of legal action. The same bureaucratic nonsense she used to bully everyone else. But I wasn't everyone else. I didn't take the letter down. I let it sit there, fluttering in the breeze for everyone to see. Let them know. Let them watch. And then, the real attack came. I was working in my garage when I heard it. A crash. I ran outside, heart pounding, my cross shattered. The wooden beams lay broken on the ground, splintered into pieces. The nails had been ripped out. Someone had come onto my property and torn it down. My hands curled into fists. I looked around, but the street was empty. Too empty. Like everyone already knew. And then, like clockwork, Karen stepped outside. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even try to hide the smug satisfaction on her face. "Well," she said, feigning concern, "it seems like some people really don't like controversy." I took a step forward. "You did this." She gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Me? Oh, please. I was inside all night. You don't have proof of anything." I clenched my jaw, breathing through my rage. "This is vandalism." Karen simply shrugged. "Then call the police." She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to explode, to give her the satisfaction of losing control. I refused. I stepped back, nodding slowly. "Okay." Her smirk twitched. She expected a fight. A scene. She didn't expect me to stay calm. I turned and walked back into my garage, grabbed my hammer, some fresh nails, and a new plank of wood. Then, right there, in front of everyone, I rebuilt it, stronger, bigger, unshakable. And as I hammered the last nail in place, I glanced up. Karen was still watching, but this time, she wasn't smiling. She was furious. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No passive-aggressive letters on my porch. No sneering neighbors pretending not to watch. No HOA goons knocking at my door. Just stillness. That should have been my first warning. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and let the morning air settle around me. The cross stood exactly where I rebuilt it, stronger than before. Karen had made her move. Now it was my turn. The HOA meeting was tomorrow, and I was ready. I had the bylaws printed, highlighted, and stapled in a folder sitting on my kitchen table. I knew my rights, and I wasn't about to be bullied off my own property. But then, the smell hit me. Something rotten, pungent, like garbage left to bake in the sun. I followed the stench around the side of my house and froze. My yard, destroyed. Garbage bags ripped open and scattered across the grass. My trash cans were knocked over, their contents smeared along the sidewalk. But worst of all, my cross. Someone had smeared it with raw eggs and a thick brown sludge that I prayed was just mud. Rage boiled up inside me. This wasn't just vandalism anymore. This was an attack. And Karen wanted me to know it. Because standing across the street, arms folded, was her. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She wanted me to see her, to know that she was behind this. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench. "You're getting desperate," I said, loud enough for her to hear. She didn't even blink. Just cleaning up the neighborhood. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You think this is going to make me back down? Her expression darkened. You don't belong here. Ah, there it was. The truth, slipping through her perfectly rehearsed mask. This was never about HOA rules, never about aesthetics. This was about control, about power, about the fact that I refused to be bullied into submission, and that infuriated her. Enjoy your little mess, she said, turning back toward her house. Because after tomorrow, you won't have a choice anymore. I watched her go, my pulse hammering in my ears. Tomorrow. She had something planned, and whatever it was, I was ready. The HOA meeting was set for 7 p.m. sharp, but I arrived early. Not because I was eager, because I knew they were setting a trap. The moment I stepped into the community center, I felt it. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The usual plastic smiles from my neighbors were gone, replaced with something colder, more rehearsed. Karen sat at the front of the room, perched like a queen behind the long HOA board table. Her expression was smug, her fingers tapping lazily against the wood. She had planned something, and everyone in this room knew it. I took my seat near the front, gripping my folder a little tighter. The bylaws were on my side. Logic was on my side. But in a room full of people who had already decided I was the enemy, logic wouldn't save me. The meeting dragged on, each agenda item ticking by like a slow, deliberate countdown to my execution. And then, finally, Karen leaned into her microphone. And now, our final matter of business, she said, her voice sweet and venomous all at once. The issue of non-compliant exterior displays in our neighborhood. Every head in the room turned toward me. I didn't flinch. Karen sighed dramatically, flipping through a stack of papers. Despite multiple warnings, fines, and requests for compliance, the homeowner at 314 Maple Drive has refused to adhere to HOA regulations. We have received numerous complaints about this disruption. She looked up, her gaze locking onto mine. And unfortunately, she continued, since he has shown blatant disregard for community standards, the board has unanimously agreed to escalate the matter. Effective immediately, we will be pursuing legal action to have the structure forcibly removed. A murmur rippled through the room, some nodding, some avoid my gaze entirely. I let out a slow breath, then stood up, calm, controlled, unshaken. That's interesting, I said, pulling my own stack of papers from my folder. Because I took the liberty of reviewing the HOA bylaws myself. Karen's smirk twitched, just slightly. I held up a highlighted page. Nowhere does it say anything about religious displays being prohibited. And actually, according to state law, HOAs cannot enforce rules that discriminate against religious expression on private property. Silence. Karen's fingers curled against the table. I leaned forward, locking eyes with each board member. Every fine, every warning, it isn't just unfair, it's unlawful. I refuse to be held hostage by rules meant to suppress our freedoms. A heavy silence settled, punctuated by the rustle of shifting papers and uneasy glances. Karen's fingers tapped a staccato rhythm on the polished wood, a nervous beat betraying her forced authority. You're endangering our community's order, she said, though her voice wavered with an unspoken fear. Lowering my voice, I murmured, or perhaps you're clinging to control because you're afraid that even a sliver of independence might reveal your own vulnerabilities. For a split second, her steely gaze softened, a silent admission of fear, before hardening into defiance once more. The tension in the room deepened with every heartbeat. Checkmate. I could see it happening, the plan crumbling in real time. She expected me to come in here defensive, angry, flustered. Instead, I had ripped the power right out of her hands. I turned to the board, tucking my papers back into my folder. If you'd like to take this to court, be my guest. but you're going to lose. And when you do, this HOA is going to be hit with a lawsuit of its own." The board members looked at each other. Karen's jaw clenched. She had lost, and she knew it. For a few long, glorious seconds, nobody spoke. The board members shuffled uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances. A few of them were clearly regretting letting Karen drag them into this mess. The room wasn't on her side anymore, and she felt it. Karen's face was frozen in an unnatural smile. Tight, forced, barely containing the storm brewing behind her eyes. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. I wanted her to sit in it, to feel every second of her crumbling control. "You're wrong," she finally spat, her voice sharper now, cracking under the weight of her unraveling plan. "The HOA has every right to enforce community guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "Sure, when the guidelines actually exist. But since you're making them up as you go, that's a little harder to enforce, isn't it?" A few people in the room chuckled. Karen's nostrils flared. She slammed her papers onto the table. "This is about respect." Ah, there it was. "This is about a community," she continued, voice rising. "And communities have rules. We can't just let people do whatever they want. Otherwise, where does it end?" I crossed my arms. "It ends with people like you thinking they can police what their neighbors believe in?" Gasps. A couple of board members shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable now that things were getting messy. But Karen didn't care anymore. She was past the point of reason. "You think you're some kind of hero?" she hissed, voice trembling with rage. Some kind of martyr?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She was spiraling, and everyone could see it. "You people always think you're being persecuted," she snapped, eyes wild now. "But you're the problem. You're the one dividing this neighborhood. She stopped. Because she saw it. The board members weren't nodding along anymore. They were staring at her. And worse? So was everyone else. Karen had lost them. She had overplayed her hand. Her breath came fast and uneven. She turned back to the board, expecting backup, but found only blank, unsupportive faces. Finally, the HOA president, an older woman who had been quiet this entire time, cleared her throat. "Karen," she said carefully, "I think we should move on." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She knew what that meant. The board wasn't going to fight for her. She was alone. And when she finally sat down, red-faced and seething, she knew it too. I had won. The meeting ended with no resolution, just the awkward, unspoken understanding that Karen had lost all credibility. I walked out with my head high, feeling the weight of weeks of harassment finally start to lift. Karen was still sitting at the table, staring at nothing, stewing in her own failure. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. If this story inspired you to stand up for your beliefs, hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your own experience, and don't forget to share and subscribe for more real-life tales of defiance. Remember, your freedom is your power. Never let anyone take it away. The next morning, things felt different. The usual Karen patrol, her daily surveillance of my house, was gone. No nasty letters, no new complaints, no neighbors whispered when I walked past. And for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to go down quietly. Sure enough, by noon, I saw her storming across the street toward my house. I didn't even bother stepping outside. I just waited, arms crossed, as she banged on my door like she was the police. I opened it slowly. "Can I help you?" Karen's face was tight with forced composure. She held out a thick folder. "You should read this." I took it but didn't open it. "What is it this time?" She crossed her arms. "Since the board refuses to do their job, I'm taking matters into my own hands. I've spoken to a lawyer, and I'm prepared to sue you personally for diminishing property values in the neighborhood." I stared at her. Then I laughed. A full, deep, uncontrollable laugh. Karen's eyes twitched. "You think this is funny?" I wiped a tear from my eye. "Oh, absolutely," she huffed. "I will win. I have documentation. I have proof. And when I win, you'll be forced to take that disgusting thing down." I glanced over her shoulder at my cross, still standing tall, still unshakable. Then I looked back at her and smiled. "Try me." She blinked. "What?" I stepped forward just enough for her to feel the weight of my confidence. "Take me to court, Karen. Go ahead, because when you do, I'll countersue for harassment, for emotional distress, for targeted discrimination." Her mouth opened, but I didn't stop. "And when will I win?" I leaned in. "Not only will my cross stay up, but I'll make sure the whole neighborhood knows exactly what kind of person you are." Silence. Karen's face paled, because she knew I was right. I held up the folder she had given me and, without breaking eye contact, tore it in half. She gasped like I had physically struck her. "You're done, Karen," I said simply, then stepped back inside and shut the door in her face. Through the peephole, I watched her stand there, shaking, silent. Then, finally, she turned and walked away. And this time, she didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. Karen had thrown everything she had at me: harassment, lies, intimidation. But in the end, it was all hot air. She had nothing left, no allies, no power. And after that final showdown on my doorstep, she knew it. At first, I expected some last desperate act of defiance. Another letter, another ridiculous complaint, maybe even another vandalism attempt. But days passed, and then, a week. And Karen? She vanished. Her usual morning walks, gone. Her watchful glares, gone. Even her presence at HOA meetings had disappeared. It was like she had evaporated. The rumors started soon after. "She's resigning from the HOA board," one neighbor whispered. "I heard she's putting her house up for sale," another said. I didn't believe it, until I saw the sign. One morning, while sipping my coffee on the porch, I looked across the street and there it was. For sale. A bright, bold sign hammered into Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. I nearly choked on my drink. I stood up, staring at it like I had hallucinated the whole thing. But no, it was real. Karen was actually leaving. I didn't see her much after that. Once or twice I caught glimpses of her, rushing to her car, avoiding eye contact, a shell of the tyrant she once was. The Karen who ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist? Gone. And then, one day, so was she. The moving trucks came early in the morning. A few HOA members stood outside, watching but saying nothing. No send-off. No goodbyes. Just an uncomfortable, awkward silence as Karen loaded up the last of her things. I leaned against my porch railing, watching. For a split second, our eyes met. And in that moment, I saw it. The defeat, the bitterness, the anger that had nowhere to go. She knew she had lost. I gave her a slow nod, a silent farewell. She scowled, turned away, and got in her car. And just like that, she was gone. The tyrant of the HOA, the neighborhood dictator, the woman who tried to control everything and everyone. Gone. And my cross, still standing. The day after Karen left, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter, quieter, almost peaceful. For the first time in years, there were no more HOA warnings stuffed into mailboxes. No more condescending emails. No more Karen standing on her porch, watching, judging, waiting to pounce on the next violation. Just life moving on without her. I half expected someone else to take her place. Another busybody, another self-appointed enforcer of the rules. But instead, something strange happened. People relaxed. The same neighbors who once whispered about me, The ones who had avoided eye contact at HOA meetings? They started waving when I walked by. A few even stopped to chat. One morning, I caught Mr. Thompson, the grumpiest old man on the street, setting up a set of wind chimes on his porch. Wind chimes, the same decorations Karen had banned for being too disruptive. I raised an eyebrow. Aren't those against HOA guidelines? He gave me a crooked smile. What HOA? I blinked. What do you mean? He chuckled, leaning on his cane. No one cares about the rules anymore, son. Not since she left. Half the board quit. The rest don't want to deal with the mess she left behind. He shrugged. As far as I'm concerned, the HOA's dead. I stared at him, then at the chimes swaying in the breeze. Karen spent years ruling this place with an iron grip. And now? In just a few days, her entire empire had crumbled. The irony was almost poetic. Good riddance, I muttered, sipping my coffee. Thompson chuckled. Damn right. And just like that, life moved on. Karen had spent so much time trying to control this neighborhood, trying to mold it into her perfect little world. But the second she was gone, everything she built collapsed. People painted their houses the colors they wanted. Lawn ornaments started popping up on yards that had been bare for years. Families played music on their porches without fear of a warning letter. And me? I stood in my yard, looking up at my cross, still standing, still strong, and smiled. This was my home. And no one, not even Karen, was ever going to take that from me again. A few weeks passed, and Karen became nothing more than a bad memory. The neighborhood thrived without her iron grip. People were happier, freer. It was almost like waking up from a long nightmare. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was another old HOA warning that had been lost in the system, some last remnant of Karen's reign. But when I opened it, my eyebrows shot up. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from Karen. A legal notice. Apparently, she wasn't done with me yet. Even after losing everything, even after moving away, she was still trying to come after me. The letter claimed I had defamed her, that my actions had led to her being harassed and ridiculed, forcing her to leave the neighborhood. And the best part? She was threatening to sue me for damages. I let out a laugh, a full, genuine laugh. This woman, even in defeat, she just couldn't let it go. I should have been angry, but honestly, I wasn't. I was amused, because this was pathetic. She'd already lost her power, her reputation, and her home. And now she wanted to throw one last tantrum before disappearing forever. Fine, let her try. I forwarded the letter to a lawyer, and within 2 days, I got my answer. She has no case. She's bluffing. I wasn't surprised. I had done nothing wrong. If anything, she was the one guilty of harassment. So I did exactly what Karen hated the most. I ignored her. And just like that, she lost again. The lawsuit never happened. She never followed through. Because deep down, even Karen knew she had no power left. She was finished. With Karen officially out of my life, I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in months, my home truly felt like my own again. No more battles, no more games, just peace. One evening, as I stood outside watering my plants, I saw something that made me pause. A young couple was walking down the sidewalk, hand in hand. I hadn't seen them before. New neighbors. They stopped in front of Karen's old house, looking at it thoughtfully. I called out, "You thinking of moving in?" The woman smiled. "Yeah, it just went on the market. Looks like a great neighborhood." I chuckled. "It is now." They laughed, then continued their walk. I watched them go, shaking my head. Karen had spent years trying to control this place, trying to force it into her idea of perfect. And now, Her house belonged to someone else, someone who didn't know her, someone who wouldn't care. She had vanished, and the world kept turning without her. I looked up at my cross, still standing tall, still unshaken. I had won, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, undeniably free. Life moved on. The neighborhood flourished without Karen's suffocating grip, and I finally felt the peace I had fought so hard for. But then, one evening, something strange happened. I was locking up for the night when I noticed a car parked across the street. Not just any car, Karen's car. My heart kicked up a notch. She was sitting in the driver's seat, unmoving, just watching. A chill ran down my spine. What the hell was she doing here? For a moment, I thought she was about to march up to my door, start screaming, 'cause a scene. One last desperate act of defiance. But she didn't. She just sat there. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, staring right back at her, letting her know I saw her. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she drove away. I stood there for a long time, watching the taillights disappear into the night. And for the first time, I realized the truth. Karen wasn't here to fight. She wasn't here to reclaim her lost empire. She was here because she couldn't let go. Even after everything, even after losing, some part of her was still trapped here, still obsessing. She had built her life around control. And now that she had none, she had nowhere else to go. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't feel fear. I felt pity. Karen had spent so much time trying to break me, but in the end, she was the one who shattered. And there was nothing left for her but ghosts. Days passed, and Karen never returned. Maybe that one last look was all she needed. Maybe she finally accepted that she had lost. Or maybe she was still out there somewhere, bitter, seething, trapped in the past. Either way, I didn't care. One evening, while taking out the trash, I saw my new neighbors, the couple that had moved into Karen's old house. They had started decorating, planting flowers, making the place their own. And then I saw it. A welcome sign hanging on their porch. Nothing special. Just a simple wooden sign that said, "Love thy neighbor." I grinned. Oh, the irony. If Karen had still been here, she would have lost her mind. I walked over. "Looks great," I said, nodding at the sign. The husband smiled. "Thanks. We just want this to feel like home." Home. Something Karen had spent years trying to dictate, trying to control, trying to make her version perfect. And yet, the real perfect neighborhood had only emerged after she was gone. I glanced back at my house, at my cross standing tall against the darkening sky. It had withstood everything. Her complaints, her threats, even her last pathetic attempt to come after me. Karen was gone, and I was still here, still standing. Months passed, life moved on, the neighborhood flourished, and then one day I got a text from a friend. "You're not gonna believe this." Attached was a link to a local news article. I clicked it, brows furrowing as I skimmed the words. And then I burst out laughing. Karen had tried to pull the same stunt in her new neighborhood. Different place, same Karen. The HOA complaints, the demands, the power trip. But this time, she lost faster than ever. Apparently, her new neighbors had no patience for her nonsense. They had called her out immediately. Her complaints were ignored, her demands shut down, and her reputation? Ruined within weeks. And the best part? According to the article, Karen had been voted out of the HOA board within a month. Her reign of terror had lasted 30 days. I shook my head, chuckling. Some people never learn. I stepped outside, taking a deep breath of fresh air. Birds chirped, kids laughed in the distance. Wind chimes, the same kind Karen had once banned, sang softly in the breeze. Karen was someone else's problem now. And me? I had my peace. Finally, Karen thought she could control everything, but she lost. Her power crumbled, her influence disappeared, and in the end, I was still here. But this isn't just my story. It's a reminder that no one can take away your faith, your freedom, or your right to stand your ground. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Because trust me, we all know a Karen out there. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a thing. Thanks for being here, and remember, stand tall, stand strong, and never let Karen win.